as Willie found some answers for 2019. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking Florida State football. We got Logan Robinson on the line from Noles Game Day. Of course, don't forget to share these videos, like, comment, and subscribe if you love college football. Logan, how you doing tonight?
Good evening. Doing great. Just got home, had some dinner, and always ready to talk some football, that's for sure.
I know this is your first time on the show. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for letting me come on.
So Florida State, much to talk about here, obviously coming off 5-7. I kind of liken the Florida State situation to a certain extent with USC, two national brands that just appear to have way too much talent on the roster to win 5 games. But that's in the rearview mirror, and I've told many Florida State fans who comment to me on a regular basis, I'm going to stop reciting 5-7, 5-7 over and over and over. We're on to 2019, and before we actually dive into what we saw on the field last Saturday and for the last 15 sessions, Logan, let's hit this recruiting front, because Willie gets past spring ball and dives right into it in terms of throwing offers all over the place at 4- and 5-star athletes.
Florida State is pushing hard, definitely with Willie Taggart right now, and then he's got his new coaches, Randy Clement, and then also Kendall Briles, the new offensive coordinator. Florida State fans are happy about that. So they're definitely want to use these two guys to recruit some of the big positions, as the main one being offensive line. Florida State actually reached in the top 6 of a 5-star defensive end, Reggie Grimes. This was most recently this last couple of days, actually. And then Florida State is going after a 2020 blue chip offensive lineman, Jonathan Dennis. As we know, Florida State needs some offensive linemen. I know I will note later on in the show about Dante Lucas, who's already with Florida State early enroll. If they're able to aim for guys like Lucas with Jonathan Dennis, with that same mentality, then Florida State will do really well on the offensive line side moving forward. Florida State also extended an offer to 2020 tight end Blake Smith. That happened on Tuesday. He's out of South Lake, Carroll Heights, and South Lake, Texas. And then Florida State also brought out an offer to a guy from Canada. He's a tight end. His name is Theo Johnson, and he's a 4-star 2020 recruit. Right now, Florida State holds just mainly 2 tight ends, one of them actually being a player that switched positions, and Gabe Neighbors. But there's also Trey McKitty, which a lot of fans are hoping to see some upside from him this upcoming year. So tight end is somewhere where Florida State is going to make a push to. And then lastly, there's 2021 defensive end Tunmais Adeli. That's a hard name to say, but he comes from Tompkins High School in Katy, Texas. Defensive end is, a note to be taken with Brian Burns being gone. Florida State also will have Janarius Robinson and Kane Doe coming up this year, but a 2021 guy from Texas looking deep into the future. So, and as we know, 2020 QB commit Jeff Sims is probably the main recruiter for most of these guys. He's been pushing hard on Twitter. He had a pretty good 7-on-7 camp, I believe, which was in Tampa. He showed out with his team there. So Jeff Sims is somebody to keep an eye on as being your top dog, as a big recruiter for the Noles moving forward.
You get that Canadian tight end, which if you've got to go to Canada for talent, there's nothing wrong with that if they can play up there. But kid might pass out in the heat in August in Florida, not quite being used to that.
He might. The humidity is different.
We got Logan Robinson on the line from Noles Game Day. Please join him and the rest of the staff right there for Florida State football coverage. And before we move on to 2019, what just happened over the past month in Tallahassee on the field, just in regards to broad perspective on recruiting during these 2 or 3 cycles that Willie Taggart's had his hand on, in regards to not specifics, but they've been roughly top 15 classes, but at the same time, a lot of misses. So you and the staff's thoughts about Willie Taggart's approach to recruiting and whether he's been successful thus far.
So far, the focus has definitely been on a little bit of offensive line and linebacker. That's what fans have complained about, and I'm sure the staff has too. There hasn't been much a good product coming out of those two positions. He did land who's going to be his quarterback, number one, who we talked about with Jeff Sims. And he's got an offensive lineman, Dante Lucas, true freshman, who was an early enrollee that is already showing out, who's gained a lot of respect. So what he's bringing in, right now and in the future is what fans are happy to see. Florida State went through a rough class in 2018. A lot of those guys didn't produce from what fans and analysts thought they would. And the main problem is a lot of mentally challenges. And also we gotta think too, Willie Taggart's got to get his guys into this program in order to fit this offense and the whole team as a whole, but mainly offense. These guys were ready to run through Jimbo Fisher's offense, which is definitely a lot slower than Willie Taggart's. And the thing is, it's only going to get even quicker and quicker with Kendall Briles coming in, who's running plays in a matter of 15 seconds. So a lot of conditioning is going to have to go through these guys to fit in. And this is who he's going to start nailing on. Quick, speedy, and Florida State always delivers on the defensive side, mainly the defensive backs. And, that name of DBU reaches out far from the Florida State fan base. And Florida State continues to bring in guys, mainly like Akeem Dent, who's a true freshman, early enrolled. And then also a guy that I'm high on out of Madison County, Travis J., who I think is going to be a star at Florida State. So Florida State is always usually going to deliver on that defensive back side. So right now, it seems like everybody's kind of feeling nice with what Taggart's bringing in. They just got to see it excel and, turn out on the field.
Talking Florida State football, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, with Logan Robinson from Noles Game Day, and of course the spring game just wrapped up on Saturday. And we'll keep it right there, Logan, because you mentioned Travis J., one player that you're high on. Whether it was entering the spring season or what you were able to gather in terms of information from the scrimmages and what happened during the spring season, who else are you high on? Who could be breakout players that maybe aren't necessarily on everybody's radar?
Aside from Asante, Asante Samuel Jr. is someone that had flashes of being a very good product coming to Florida State. He had strong spots in the season last year, but you could tell he was young, true freshman. Had a few mistakes, mental mistakes. He's got a big attitude, which usually works for Florida State football players really well. That what happened in 2013, very high on themselves, and if he can talk it and back it up, then that's what fans like to see. So Asante Samuel Jr., cornerback, is someone I'd keep an eye on. A guy that I was really, really high on, actually got to go see him practice, was going to be a sophomore defensive end, Xavier Peters, who actually was just and he's just had a team violation, so he's been suspended as of right now. Hopefully that will change coming into the spring or the summer and the fall. But another guy that's going to be a sleeper is going to be Anthony Grant, who is a running back. He's going to be behind Cam Akers and Kalen LeBourne. I think he could play a big role with Florida State's offense. The top two guys, Akers and LeBourne, are going to have a lot of playing time. I think LeBourne is actually someone that's going to have a great year for Florida State. I think he has a better year than Cam Akers, just because I think he fits a little bit better into Kendall Briles' offense. Those two right there, Asante Samuel and then Anthony Grant, are two guys that I'd like to have some people put their eyes on moving into the fall.
Kendall Briles' offense is obviously the storylines for Florida State football going into this camp and going into 2019. Willie Taggart, known for a similar style of offense, so it seemed to be a marriage made in heaven or in Tallahassee, whatever you want to put there. Were we able to, whether it be in the spring game or any of the notes that came out of the scrimmages prior to the spring game, get a good feel for whether the players took to it, acclimated to it, whether it proves successful, at least to this point, with a whole lot of work to do, obviously, in August. Just your thoughts about Kendall Briles' offense.
So I actually went and saw the first two practices that Florida State held during the spring. Went straight to Kendall Briles and Randy Clements, those two new coaches that Taggart brought in. I went straight to Briles at first to go see how he was coaching, definitely with the quarterbacks. And Taggart gave Briles the entire practice by himself with the quarterbacks, working with them. The Briles offense likes to be fast. It's even faster than Taggart's Gulf Coast offense, as we heard before. It's something that I think Florida State's team is going to have to get used to. There's going to have to be a lot of conditioning. After, I believe, this last scrimmage, I heard that the offense was pretty tired. They were whooped. It's not mostly because it's simple. Kendall Briles wants it to be simple for the players, so they can get out there faster. But there's also going to be a lot of subbing. So it's a quick motion. Most plays are within 15 seconds of each other. He likes to spread the field, and he wants to work on one-on-one situations with his wide receivers. He's got wide splits for his wide receivers, making sure that he's given a good dose of explosiveness to the defense. He likes to do a pass to run attack where you'll have elements of power and zone. He wants to throw it deep. That's where, like, Tamarion Terry, Kayshawn Hilton, DJ Matthews could be a danger. Even Keith Gavin, who's had some, rough career at Florida State, could really excel if things go right. But to make it more simple, Briles is going to he doesn't even use a sheet in his hand. I noticed that whenever they are running 11-on-11s, he will sit on the field. He doesn't want to be in the box upstairs. He wants to be on the field, and he'll direct his signals with his hands. And he says that he'll use this. He'll be able to watch the defense. It makes it a little bit more better for him because he can move these guys, see, all right, Tamarion Terry isn't working this well with this DB. He'll sub in a guy like Keith Gavin, maybe a little bit more bigger and physical. And it just seems like Florida State and Taggart really likes what Briles is going to bring. So we'll see. It's just going to have to do a lot with conditioning and making sure these guys can go in, because as we saw last year, it was moving very quickly, but things were all over the place. It was just atrocious at times. So if Kendall Briles can clean it up, make it simple, knows who's in, who's out, no more these flags that are really bad, then you could see Briles and his offense excel.
Yeah, I think the team averaged over 9 penalties per game last year, one of the worst marks in the nation. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking up Florida State for you with Logan Robinson from Noles Game Day. So I encourage you to jump on the line, look at Noles Game Day for your Florida State football fix right there. You mentioned the name Cam Akers. Obviously, he had a pretty substantial season 2 years ago. Not a great season, but about 1,000 yards. And then injuries kicked in, style of offense. You mentioned that not necessarily being a good fit. It seems kind of like a make or break situation for a player who was recruited by a different coach for a different offense, and a guy that probably should be a feature back in an offense where now he needs to be more versatile.
And that was a big problem last year, and a lot was to blame for the offensive line. But Akers had a lot of slip-ups too in the way he was playing. It didn't look as smooth as he was his freshman year. You could tell when we had flashes of Kalen LeBourne, the freshman, we were kind of wondering, ooh, maybe he fits a little bit better in what Taggart's running. As we know, Taggart rushed for Cam Akers rushed for 1,025 yards as a true freshman with a quarterback who was also a true freshman. Akers grabbed 7 touchdowns in that year too. And it just kind of, it depends. I mean, if I'm picking who could run better in Taggart's offense, I'd go Kalen LeBourne. He's got the jump. He's got a little bit of the juke action. It's a big argument because you go in and you're like, all right, well, Cam Akers had a great year his first year, and he produced well. with what Jimbo was running, but it seemed to change a lot. But the offensive line also fell through for him.
We're talking college football on here each and every day. Just check out the videos if you have yet to look at the library. We get to all the major programs on a regular basis, including Florida State. We got Logan Robinson on the line for the first time from Knowles at Game Day. And when we look at Florida State coming up here in 2019, Alex Hornibrook comes in from the outside, but obviously he has yet to take the field. That's coming in August. Still not expected to compete for the starting job seriously, from what I understand, although pretty impressive career at Wisconsin, but supported by the big offensive line in the ground game. James Blackman, are you in his camp, Logan? Your thoughts on James Blackman and what he's been able to do thus far, and maybe what his ceiling is?
I've been on high on James Blackman since last spring, so I went to a couple of the practices in the spring and actually saw videos and heard some things during the fall. James Blackman, as we know, kind of has that Jameis Winston factor with his leadership. That's all we're going to say, leadership. And that plays a big factor in creating relationships with players around you. And as being a leader too, when I played high school football, my quarterback was a big leader, and he made sure to create relationships with other players and even the younger guys. And James Blackman's been doing that since he started at Florida State. Whenever I would watch the games last year, I would see how DeAndre Francois was making his reads, and he would miss quite a bit of guys. He likes to stare down his receiver, which I think is a problem. James Blackman can take advantage of being able to eye guys. We actually went and saw him at the practice a few months ago, and I got to see, wow, this quarterback actually reads other wide receivers, and that plays a big role on where the safety's going and the field back behind, and it also plays on how many guys are open, like DJ Matthews, which we saw in the spring practices, that how well he was connecting with DJ Matthews, Kayshawn Helton, Ontario Wilson, and of course, Tamarion Terry. James Blackman's deep ball is precious. It's something special, and that's what Kendall Briles is going to like a lot too, because he will strike at you out of nowhere with a deep ball, most likely to a one-on-one situation. If it's one-on-one with Tamarion Terry, then that's most likely going to be a catch, as we saw last year. So go ahead.
Go ahead, Logan.
With James Blackman being this type of leader, and a lot of people thought that he should have started after the NC State game. He was the ACC player of the week that week, and the way that he showed his leadership and how he can connect with wide receivers, definitely the younger ones that he did in the NC State game, and like Trey McKitty and DJ Matthews and Tamarion Terry. I think James Blackman will excel definitely in this Kendall Briles offense, actually.
So, Logan, we're not going to pin you down on this one until August, but when you take everything into consideration, meaning this has to be the second most talented roster in the conference. That doesn't necessarily produce the second most wins, but Clemson is obviously far and away the best team, best roster. Not necessarily the best roster. It is the best roster, but not far and away. But they've separated themselves unlike any other Power 5 team in a particular conference based on, obviously, what they've accomplished. But looking at the infusion of another recruiting class that was strong, Kendall Briles running the offense, James Blackman with another year under his belt, considering two difficult non-conference games with Boise State and Florida on the schedule, what type of realistic expectations do you have for this team?
The first thing that comes to my head, of course, is the offensive line. It's been that factor the last 2 years, 3 years almost. And that kind of goes to thanking Rick Trickett and Jimbo Fisher for really not giving a you-know-what for that position group. So if it were me, I think it's very, very successful season and a good sign heading forward under Taggart and company is an 8-4 year. A 7-5 is not too bad, but you got to remember, this is Florida State University. This isn't Cincinnati. This isn't other places. There's not many other places like Florida State other than you got Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, and you try to put Florida State up there with Ohio State and all those kind of teams. An 8-4 season is definitely heading in the right direction. Kind of the same pathway with how Jimbo Fisher went. It was a up battle from there. So an 8-4 would not be terrible whatsoever. Of course, Florida State's going to have to go to Death Valley, and they're going to have to face Clemson, and they'll have James Blackman there going off against Trevor Lawrence, who, as we know, is trouble, and he's going to be trouble for a while. Probably head into the NFL. So 8-4, 7-5 is okay. 8-4 is, I like that.
It's funny how if you ask your typical college football fan to name players on his own team or on other teams, the one position where he's going to name the least amount of players is going to be the offensive line. Those guys are basically nameless unless it's an All-American, and that's typically the unit that makes it all work. If you don't have those guys in play, it doesn't matter how much speed or anything else that you have. Aside from the quarterback position, I'm going to argue is the most important position on the field as a unit, especially in a speed conference where you got rush ends coming off like crazy that can disrupt any play. If you don't get those guys blocked, then everything gets blown to shreds. So got to get that off.
It does. It does. I mean, we saw it too with what Francois, what he had to go through, and then also James Blackman. It's not great having an offensive line that is not excelling. And if FSU is able to have just an average offensive line, you could see this offense do wonders. And definitely with a passer like James Blackman, who's getting better on his accuracy. We know what his deep ball has, and if he's actually reading, and I think he does read better than DeAndre Francois, then the offense can move. And that means if the offensive line's getting after it, these can open up holes where Cam Akers can do his thing, and Kalen LeBourne and Anthony Grant can sub in and do some awesome moves, like we saw with Kalen LeBourne whenever he was playing against Virginia Tech. That move that he made on 3-4 guys was spectacular, and that was having to deal with a pretty atrocious offensive line. So we'll see.
All right, Logan Robinson, check him out on Noles Game Day. Logan, we appreciate you stopping by. Your first appearance. You are certainly welcome back, sir.
Of course. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Thanks for inviting me.